Don't cry. Look behind you." Those were the words I heard at my husband's grave, quiet, breathy, and impossibly familiar. And in that instant, the world around me stopped. The wind that had been carrying the scent of fresh lilies through the cemetery went still. My knees felt weak, and I clutched the edge of the gravestone as if it could hold me upright. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it over the rustling leaves. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, the kind of cruel trick grief plays on a mind that refuses to accept loss. But the voice, it wasn't some faint echo or breeze. It was him. It was Daniel, my husband, the man I'd buried 3 weeks earlier. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. The part of me that wanted to believe was fighting with the part of me that had watched him lowered into the ground with my own eyes. Instead, I stood there frozen, the cold November air cutting against my cheeks, the flowers I'd brought trembling in my hands. When I finally did turn, there was no one there. Just the rows of gravestones stretching into the fog, the distant sound of a crow cawing, and a lone man in a dark coat walking toward the exit gate. I wanted to call out, but what would I even say? "Excuse me, did you just whisper to me in my dead husband's voice?" So instead, I sank onto the damp grass, pressing my hand against the letters etched into the stone. Daniel Pierce. Loving husband, devoted father, and man of honor. 1980-2025. A part of me almost laughed at the man of honor part, because after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure that's what he really was. But that's not where this story begins. To understand what led me to that grave, and the voice that followed me there, you need to know what my life looked like before everything fell apart. Daniel and I had been married for 23 years. He was the kind of man people called steady, dependable. Never late to work, never lost his temper, never missed Sunday dinner. He worked in logistics, the kind of job that kept him glued to spreadsheets and phone calls, but brought in a comfortable income. Our home sat on the corner of Maple and 4th, a 2-story brick house with peeling white shutters and a lilac bush that always bloomed early. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I used to love the quiet of our mornings, the smell of coffee percolating, the sound of Daniel humming some old Eagles song while he packed his lunch. Our daughter Rachel would shuffle into the kitchen half awake, asking if I could braid her hair before school. She's 20 now, studying nursing in another city, but back then, our mornings felt like little pockets of peace before the world intruded. That's the thing about routine. You never realize how sacred it is until it's gone. Daniel wasn't a man of many words. He showed love through small things, fixing the squeaky hinge on the pantry door, leaving the car tank full, or saving the last piece of pie for me, even when I'd said I didn't want any. Our marriage wasn't dramatic or glamorous. It was ordinary, and I used to think ordinary was safe. But I've learned that sometimes ordinary hides secrets better than anything else. It started about 6 months before his death. Daniel became distracted, not in a way that was obvious to others, but to me, the changes were subtle and sharp. He started working later than usual. He'd step out onto the porch to take calls he said were from clients, and at night he'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling long after the lights went out. When I'd ask if something was wrong, he'd smile, that soft, reassuring smile he'd used since we were 20, and say, "Just work stress, Em. You know how it is." And I wanted to believe him. I really did. I remember one night in particular, a Wednesday in early spring. The air was cool, and I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. Daniel had just stepped outside to check the locks on the shed, but I saw the glow of his phone through the kitchen window. He was talking tea. Oh, someone. Smiling. The kind of smile that doesn't belong to a man weighed down by spreadsheets. When he came back in, I asked, "Who were you talking to?" He paused just a split second too long. "Just Mark from the office. The shipping reports all over the place." I nodded, but something cold curled in my stomach. Later that night, when he showered, I checked his phone. I know it's wrong, and even now I'm not proud of it, but curiosity mixed with unease can be a dangerous thing. His call log was clean. Too clean. No mark, no missed calls, nothing. When he came out, he kissed my forehead and said, "Everything okay?" And I said, "Yeah, everything's fine." But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks I noticed other things. His cologne changed. The new bottle wasn't one I'd ever seen before, spicier, more expensive. He'd never been one for fancy scents. He started ironing his shirts more carefully, trimming his beard twice a week instead of once. Small details, but the small things are what tell the truth. I didn't confront him then. I told myself I was imagining it. That after 23 years, maybe I was overthinking. Until the day he didn't come home. It was a Thursday evening in May. The sky had turned that dusky blue just before sunset, and I was setting the table roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of dinner Daniel loved. He was supposed to be home by 7:30. By 8:15 I texted him. Running late? No reply. By 9:00 I called. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. By midnight I was pacing the living room, my hands shaking as I called every hospital in the county. Nothing. When the knock came at 2 a.m., I already knew. 2 officers stood at the door, their faces carrying that familiar practice sympathy. They said there'd been an accident, a head-on collision just past the overpass near Mill Creek. His car had veered into the opposite lane. They said he died instantly. I remember falling to my knees not because of the words, but because of the silence that followed. In one moment, everything I knew about my life vanished. The funeral was a blur of faces and flowers, people saying things like he was such a good man and you were lucky to have him. I smiled, nodded, thanked them, but inside I felt hollow. It wasn't until after everyone left, after the casseroles, the condolences, the endless "if you need anything, just call," that I finally allowed myself to sit alone with the truth. Daniel was gone. At least, that's what I thought. Because 3 weeks later, standing at his grave, I heard him whisper, "Don't cry. Look behind you." And that's when everything I thought I knew about my husband's death and his life began to unravel. The first time I convinced myself it was just grief. People hear things, feel things, imagine impossible moments when they lose someone they love. That's what I told myself as I drove home from the cemetery. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. Every creak in the walls, every hum of the refrigerator felt like the house was breathing beside me. I sat in the living room until almost 3 a.m., the lamp casting a warm, tired glow across Daniel's old recliner. His jacket was still draped over it. I hadn't been able to move it yet. I kept replaying the sound of that voice in my mind, the exact way he used to whisper when he didn't want to wake Rachel, the same tone he used to calm me when I was upset. "Don't cry. Look behind you." What did that even mean? I thought about the man I saw walking away from the cemetery, tall, wearing a dark coat. Maybe it was him. Maybe he'd said something, and my mind twisted it into something else. Still, something inside me wouldn't settle. So the next morning I went back. The cemetery was almost empty when I arrived. The air smelled faintly of rain, and a groundskeeper was trimming the hedges near the entrance. Daniel's grave was exactly as I'd left it, the same white roses, slightly wilted now, the same uneven patch of earth still settling over the coffin. I crouched down, tracing his name again with my fingertips. "Daniel," I whispered. "If you're trying to tell me something, you need to stop. I can't do this. You're gone. You're supposed to be gone." My voice cracked on the last word. I stayed like that for a while until I noticed something odd at the base of the headstone. A folded piece of paper, slightly damp from the dew, tucked just under the flowers. At first I thought it was a sympathy note someone had left late, but when I unfolded it, my knees gave out. It was Daniel's handwriting. 3 words. "Don't trust her." No name, no signature, just those 3 words written in that familiar slant I'd recognize anywhere. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked around. The cemetery was empty except for the groundskeeper in the distance, humming softly as he worked. I folded the note and slipped it into my coat pocket. My fingers were trembling so hard I almost tore the paper. Who was her? The only woman close to Daniel before he died was me. His mother passed away years ago. Rachel was away at college. His assistant, Claire, had been at the funeral. She'd even helped with the arrangements. Claire. She'd been with him for nearly 5 years, always professional, polite, warm in that perfect way that made people comfortable. She'd brought flowers to the house the day after the funeral and had hugged me for a little too long, whispering, "He adored you, Emily. He talked about you all the time. Now I wasn't sure if that was comfort or a warning. That afternoon I drove to Daniel's office. The parking lot was nearly empty, but I spotted Claire's blue sedan parked near the entrance. Inside, the building was cold, all glass and gray carpets, the kind of place that swallows sound. I nodded at the receptionist, who gave me a small, pitying smile, and made my way to Daniel's old office. Claire was there, sitting behind his desk. My husband's desk. She jumped when she saw me. "Emily! Oh, you scared me." She stood quickly, brushing her skirt smooth. "I didn't expect you." I forced a smile. "I just wanted to pick up some of Daniel's things. A few personal items." "Oh, of course," she said, her voice light, but her eyes darted briefly toward the drawers. "Most of it's been boxed up. The company wanted to clear the space for the new department head." Her words stung. "Already?" "I know," she said softly. "It's just policy." She opened a cardboard box and began pulling things out: Daniel's coffee mug, a framed photo of the three of us from years ago, his notebook. She handed them to me one by one, but her hands trembled just slightly. When she turned to grab something from the shelf, I glanced at the desk. There was a second notebook under a stack of files, not the black one Daniel always carried, but a small brown leather one I'd never seen before. Without thinking, I slid it into my bag. That night, I opened the notebook on the kitchen table. The leather was worn, the pages creased at the corners. The first few pages were filled with numbers and shipping codes, the kind of things Daniel used for work. But about halfway through, the tone changed. April 4, she knows something. I need to be careful. April 12th meeting went badly. If anything happens, Emily must find the envelope. April 20th, they think I'm signing, but I'm not. I won't let them use my name for this. I flipped faster, my heart pounding. The last entry was dated May 2nd, the night before the accident. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I didn't trust Claire, and I was right not to. Tell Rachel I love her. And Emily, trust no one until you know everything. I sat there for a long time, the words blurring as my tears hit the page. What had Daniel gotten himself into, and why was Claire's name the one he'd written? The next morning, I drove to the site of the accident. It was a lonely stretch of highway about 10 miles outside of town, bordered by pine trees and an old rusted guardrail. The police report said he'd been driving home from a late meeting. He supposedly crossed the center line and collided with a truck. Case closed. But standing there, looking at the road, something didn't fit. There were still faint skid marks, but only one set. The police had said Daniel lost control, but the tire marks suggested someone had forced him off the road. I drove back home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. By the time I pulled into the driveway, a thought had rooted itself in my mind, ugly and impossible, but growing all the same. What if Daniel's death wasn't an accident at all? That evening, Rachel called. Her voice was tired but bright. She always tried to sound strong for me. "Hey, Mom, you okay?" I swallowed. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just taking care of some things. I was looking through Dad's old photos," she said softly. "He looked so happy in that picture of us at the lake. Remember that?" I smiled through the ache. "Of course I do. You fell in and he jumped right in after you." There was a pause. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Did Dad ever mention someone named Claire? I found an email in his old account. It looked weird." My grip on the phone tightened. "What kind of email?" "It was sent 2 days before he died. It just said, 'If anything happens, tell your mother I was right.' That's all. No context." My breath caught. "Did you delete it?" "No," she said. "I saved it. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the wall, the words looping in my mind. If anything happens..." He knew. Daniel knew something was coming. And the only person who could tell me what that was Claire. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's handwriting, those sharp, deliberate strokes spelling out, "Don't trust her." By morning, the decision was made. I couldn't just sit and wonder anymore. I needed answers. At 8 a.m., I drove straight to Daniel's office again. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that seemed to press down on everything. My heart pounded against my ribs the entire drive. Claire's car wasn't in the lot this time, but through the glass doors I saw her sitting at her desk scrolling through her phone. When she looked up and saw me, that polite smile of hers faltered just for a moment. "Emily," she said, standing quickly, "twice in 1 week. Is everything okay?" I nodded slightly, stepping into the room. "I found something, Claire, a notebook. It was Daniel's." Her eyes flicked down quick, nervous. "Oh? Where did you find it?" "In the box you gave me," I lied. "He wrote about you." Her face drained of color. "About me?" I took a step closer. "He said he didn't trust you." For a long moment the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then she laughed, soft and shaky. "Emily, grief can make us misread things. I'm sure he didn't mean." I cut her off. "He also mentioned something about signing papers, something he didn't want his name on." Her smile collapsed. "Claire," I said quietly, "what was he involved in?" She turned away, gripping the edge of the desk so tightly her knuckles went white. "You shouldn't be here. Tell me the truth." She spun back around, her voice trembling. "If I tell you, they'll come after me too." "Who?" She hesitated, glancing toward the door. Then, almost whispering, "The partners. The deal wasn't legal, Emily. Daniel found out and tried to stop it. That's why he was..." She stopped herself. "That's why he was what?" I pressed. Her lips trembled. "You need to go, now." Before I could say anything else, her phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen and her expression changed. Fear, pure and sharp, flashed across her face. She grabbed her bag and said, "I have to go." Then she pushed past me and left. I stood there for a long time, the air thick with her perfume and something else dread. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, trying to piece it all together. Illegal deal. Daniel refuses to sign. They'll come after me too. I picked up my phone and called the detective who had handled Daniel's accident. Detective Balson. He'd been kind during the investigation, but firm, the kind of man who believed in procedure. He answered on the third ring. "Mrs. Pierce, I was just about to close your husband's file this week. How are you holding up?" "Detective," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need to ask you something. Are you sure Daniel's death was an accident?" There was a pause. "Why do you ask?" "Because I found his notebook. He wrote that he was being pressured into signing something illegal, and now his assistant is terrified to talk." He sighed heavily. "Mrs. Pierce, I know this is difficult, but the evidence was clear. He veered into the opposite lane. There were witnesses." "Did anyone check the car?" "Yes. No sign of tampering." I almost hung up, but then he said, more quietly, "Off the record, though, the report never sat right with me. There was one thing we couldn't explain." My pulse quickened. "What thing?" "The black box data showed the brakes were never applied, not once, like someone cut the line or he didn't have time." I swallowed hard. "If the brakes were cut, would you be able to prove it now?" "Maybe. But I'd need the car released from impound. That takes paperwork and approval from next of kin." "Then you'll have it by tomorrow," I said. "Do it." That night, the house felt colder than usual. I tried to distract myself, made tea, folded laundry, even watched one of Daniel's favorite shows on the TV he'd insisted was too big for the living room. But the quiet pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Around midnight, I walked into the garage. Daniel's old toolbox sat against the far wall. I opened it, half hoping for a distraction, but instead, tucked under a pile of wrenches, was a small metal flash drive taped to the inside lid. I peeled it off, my fingers trembling, plugged it into my laptop. A single folder popped up labeled MP Project. Inside were PDF files, spreadsheets, and one video. The video was dated May 1st, the day before his last journal entry. My hand shook as I pressed play. Daniel appeared on the screen, sitting in his office. His tie was loose, his face pale. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice low and tired, "it means I couldn't stop them." He looked down for a moment, then back into the camera. "The project isn't what it looks like. They're falsifying data using shell companies to launder money through the contracts. I confronted them. They said they'd make it go away. But if anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Emily, please, don't trust anyone from the company, not even Claire." The video cut off there. I sat there staring at the screen, tears streaming silently down my face. He knew. He knew. The next morning, I went straight to the police station with the flash drive and the note from the grave. Detective Paulson listened quietly as I explained everything. When I finished, he rubbed his temples and said, "All right, this changes things." He promised to have forensics look at the car, the flash drive, everything. He told me to stay home and lock the doors. But that night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Emily, for your own good." I stared at the screen for a long time, my stomach twisting. Then I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No reply. The house felt too still again, like someone had pressed pause on the air itself. I turned off the lights and went upstairs, but I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I heard a sound outside, a soft crunch of gravel on the driveway. I peeked through the blinds. A black sedan sat idling by the curb. Its headlights were off. I stood there, heart hammering, until the engine finally started and the car rolled away. The next day, Detective Paulson called. "You were right," he said. "The brake line was cut clean. And there's more, the flash drive's legit. I've opened an investigation into the company. Do you think Daniel's assistant?" "Claire's missing," he interrupted. "Didn't show up for work. Her apartment's empty." A chill went down my spine. "What do I do?" I whispered. "Stay home. Keep your phone close. And if anything feels wrong, call me." But that evening, before I could even process his warning, I found something else. A manila envelope sitting on my front porch. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Daniel alive, standing outside a diner 2 towns over. The date printed on the corner was yesterday. For a long time, I just stared at the photo. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. It was Daniel, unmistakably him. The same square jaw, the same small scar above his eyebrow from when Rachel accidentally hit him with a toy car years ago. He looked tired, older maybe, but alive. Alive. The timestamp in the corner was clear: yesterday. 4:17 p.m. The diner behind him, Mary's Grill, was a place I'd never heard of. A neon sign flickered faintly above the window, and through the glass I could see cars driving by. Somewhere real. I checked the envelope again. No note. No explanation. Just that single photograph. My heart was racing, but my mind was split clean in 2. One part of me wanted to believe it, that Daniel somehow survived, that he faked it for some reason I couldn't yet see, but the other part whispered the same word over and over. Why? I didn't call Detective Paulson right away. I knew what he'd say, that the photo could be old, doctored, or part of some cruel manipulation. But something deep in my chest told me otherwise. I needed to see for myself. I packed a small bag, locked the house, and drove. Mary's Grill was 2 towns over, just off Route 12, a small roadside diner with faded red booths and a jukebox that looked like it hadn't worked in years. The kind of place Daniel would have stopped at for a late-night coffee on business trips. When I pulled into the parking lot, my stomach twisted. It was the same building from the photo, same peeling paint, same chipped sign. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions. A waitress behind the counter looked up and gave me a tired smile. "Morning, hun. Sit anywhere you like." I slid into a booth near the window, the one that matched the background of the photo. My eyes scanned the diner, every face, every shadow, but there was no sign of him. The waitress brought a menu and I forced a small smile. "Actually, I'm looking for someone. He might have been here yesterday. Tall, brown hair, blue jacket." She frowned, thinking, "Maybe. We get a lot of travelers. He pay cash?" "I don't know," I said quickly. "If he was here, was he alone?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of something uncertain. "Yeah, I remember now. He sat right where you are, kept checking the door, seemed nervous. Left in a hurry after about 20 minutes. Did he say anything?" She shrugged, asked if we had Wi-Fi, then ordered black coffee. He tipped good, that's all I remember. I nodded, sliding a few bills onto the counter as I left. As I stepped outside, I noticed a small security camera above the diner door. Maybe, just maybe, it had recorded him. I called Detective Paulson from the car. "You're sure it was him?" he asked after a long silence. "Yes. The photo was taken yesterday. There's even a diner name on the sign." "Emily," he said carefully, "if that's true, we're talking about a staged death and a federal crime. Do not go looking for him alone. Let me request the footage." But I'd already made up my mind. I thanked him and hung up. The manager at Mary's Grill, a man named Frank, was hesitant at first. "Privacy policy," he said, rubbing his neck. "We don't just hand out footage." So I told him everything, not the whole truth, but enough of it to sound desperate and real. "He's my husband," I said softly. "He's been missing for 3 weeks. Please." Something in my voice must have cracked through his defenses, because 20 minutes later I was watching the grainy footage on his office monitor, and there he was, Daniel. He walked in at exactly 4:11 p.m. wearing the same jacket from the photo. He ordered coffee, sat down, and stared out the window, not at Teach E Road, but at the parking lot, waiting. Then, at 4:26, a car pulled up, a dark sedan, tinted windows. A man in a suit stepped out, walked in, and slid into the booth across from him. They talked for less than 5 minutes. Daniel looked agitated, shaking his head. The man slid an envelope across the table. Daniel looked down at it, then got up and left. The man followed a minute later. I leaned closer to the screen. "Can you zoom in?" Frank nodded, clicking a few keys. The image sharpened not much, but enough for me to see a detail I hadn't expected. The man Daniel met with was Detective Paulson. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain refused to catch up to what my eyes were seeing. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Frank asked. I forced a nod. "Yes, thank you. You've been very helpful." I left the diner in a daze. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. If Daniel was alive, and Paulson knew, then every conversation I'd had with that man, every sympathetic tone, every word about procedure was a lie. When I got home, the front door was slightly open. I froze. I hadn't left it that way. Every sound seemed amplified: the faint hum of the refrigerator, the slow creak of the floor under my foot. I stepped inside, holding my breath. The house looked normal, but something was off. A faint smell of aftershave lingered in the air, Daniel's brand. On the kitchen table, where I'd left the notebook, there was now a single new sheet of paper, written in Daniel's handwriting: "Don't talk to Paulson. Wait for me." I backed away, clutching the note to my chest. My mind was spinning, part fear, part relief, part disbelief. Daniel was alive. He was here, in this house. I ran to the window and looked out. The street was empty, just the quiet rows of houses and the wind brushing through the trees. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. This time, it wasn't a threat. Just one line: "I'm sorry, Em, I'll explain everything soon." I didn't reply. I couldn't. My hands were trembling too badly. I wanted to scream, cry, demand answers, but instead I just sank into Daniel's old recliner, the one I'd refused to move, and pressed my forehead into my palms. He was alive. And hiding. From whom? From me? From Paulson? From whatever company had tried to silence him? And why leave me to bury him, to mourn him, if he was out there this whole time? That night, I didn't turn off the lights. Every creak in the house made me jump. I stayed awake until the pale gray of dawn seeped through the windows. When the doorbell rang at 7 a.m., my heart almost stopped. Through the peephole, I saw Paulson. He was smiling, that same gentle, practiced smile. "Morning, Mrs. Pierce," he said. "Can I come in? We need to talk." My pulse roared in my ears. The note on the table flashed in my mind: "Don't talk to Paulson." I forced my voice steady. "Now's not a good time, Detective. I'm heading out." His eyes flicked past me, scanning the inside of the house. "Everything okay? You look shaken." "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Please, I have to go." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "All right then, we'll talk later." He turned and walked toward his car, but before getting in, he glanced back just for a moment, and I swear the look in his eyes wasn't sympathy. It was warning, or possession. I couldn't tell which. That evening, another note appeared, slipped under the door this time. No name, no signature, just 6 words: "Tomorrow, same diner, come alone." The wind outside the old motel rattled the window frame, but I barely noticed. My whole world, everything I thought I'd buried with Daniel, was now sitting right in front of me. He looked older, thinner, his hair was peppered with gray, and a faint scar cut through his left eyebrow, one I'd never seen before. But his eyes, those were the same. The deep brown eyes that used to soften when he laughed, that used to watch me in the mornings when I pretended to still be asleep. Now they were full of guilt. I didn't say his name again. I couldn't. My throat. T was locked, my heart pounding so loud it was all I could hear. He spoke first. Emily, I'm sorry. Just 2 words, and it was like all the air left the room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit him, to collapse, to ask why he'd let me bury him. Instead, I just stared because for once I needed him to speak before I did. He lowered his head, hands trembling. I didn't have a choice. The words were soft but sharp, like they were cutting both of us. He explained slowly, haltingly, like someone pulling thorns out one by one. Months before the accident, Daniel had discovered that his construction company, the one he'd worked for nearly 15 years, was involved in illegal dumping, hazardous waste buried near residential zones. He tried to report it quietly, but one night he came home pale and shaken, saying someone had followed him from the site. He told his supervisor he was done, that he was going to the authorities. A week later, his car went off the cliff, except it wasn't an accident. His voice broke as he told me how he'd woken up in a hospital under a false name, bruised, disoriented. An old friend from college now in federal law enforcement helped him disappear. The men responsible for the dumping were dangerous, connected. He couldn't come home. If they knew I was alive, they'd come for you too, he said. I listened, tears streaming down my face, not because I pitied him, but because I understood the weight of that choice, the choice to vanish, to protect me by becoming a ghost. You could have told me, I whispered. My voice cracked on the last word. You could have trusted me with the truth. He closed his eyes. If I'd told you, Emily, you wouldn't have let me go. He was right, I wouldn't have. I would have fought, begged, done something reckless to keep him safe, even if it meant putting us both in danger. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I turned away, staring at the thin curtain fluttering in the draft. Do you know what it's like to mourn someone who's still breathing somewhere? To visit your grave every week? To think I was crazy for still talking to you? His voice was barely audible, every day. I thought about it every single day. He reached out then, tentative, his fingers brushing mine. I flinched instinctively before finally letting him hold my hand. His skin was warm, real. I wanted to come back, he said. But the case wasn't over. The people involved, they watched you. I couldn't risk it. The night before the funeral, I came back one last time just to see you through the window. You were asleep on the couch, holding my old jacket. I stood there until sunrise, then I left for good. A sob tore out of me before I could stop it. I covered my face, shaking. All those nights I'd thought I felt him near me. Maybe I wasn't imagining it after all. Maybe love really could linger, even when life didn't. When I finally found my voice, it was small. Why now, Daniel? Why tell me now? He hesitated, then looked me straight in the eye. Because it's over. The case is done. They've all been arrested. And I couldn't keep pretending to be dead while you were still out there crying over my grave. He smiled, then a sad, trembling thing that broke my heart all over again. I saw you that day, Emily. At the cemetery. I was watching from the trees. You looked so lost. I couldn't take it anymore. That's when I realized the whisper, the voice at the grave. It hadn't been my imagination. He really had been there. Trust no one, he'd said in the text. I asked him what that meant. He rubbed his temples. Detective Paulson. He was supposed to protect you, but he's one of them. He's been feeding them information this whole time. I couldn't risk him knowing you'd heard from me. My stomach turned cold. Every conversation I'd had with Paulson replayed in my mind the sympathetic smiles, the calls that always seemed to come right after I visited the grave, the way he'd insisted I should move on. Daniel continued. I wanted to tell you in person. Tonight, as the first time I knew it was safe. For a long time we just sat there, no words left to say. Outside, rain started to fall, tapping softly against the glass. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was my old locket, the one I'd lost years ago. I kept it, he said. It reminded me why I had to make it through. That broke me completely. I fell into his arms, sobbing years of grief pouring out in one trembling breath. When the storm passed, we talked until dawn, not just about the past, but about everything in between, about how he'd lived under a false name in another state, working odd jobs, watching from afar as I rebuilt myself piece by piece. He said he'd seen the article about my art gallery opening last year, that he'd stood outside watching from across the street, smiling like a proud husband who couldn't step inside. I told him about the nights I'd cursed him, the mornings I couldn't get out of bed, the way I'd eventually learned to breathe again for both of us. By sunrise, the motel room felt lighter, though neither of us had slept. When he finally said he had to go to meet with the agency and prepare to testify, I didn't try to stop him this time. I just nodded. "I'll come back when it's safe," he said, standing in the doorway. No more lies, and for the first time, I believed him. When he walked away, I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because this time, I knew he wasn't gone forever. 3 days after that night in the motel, the world began to shift. I didn't hear from Daniel again, not directly, but the silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It felt full, like the quiet before sunrise. I could feel that something was moving in the background, something long overdue. It started with a knock on my door, Detective Paulson. He stood there in his usual beige coat, his hand resting on the frame like he'd done it 100 times before. His voice carried that same blend of pity and familiarity. "Mrs. Hart," he said, "may I come in?" I stepped aside, keeping my expression neutral. I'd practiced it, the calm face of someone who'd finally stopped playing a role. He looked around my living room, eyes sweeping over the framed photos on the mantel, all the pieces of a life he thought he knew. "You haven't been answering my calls," he said. "I've been busy," I replied. He nodded slowly, pretending to understand. "I just wanted to check on you." The anniversary of Daniel's passing must still be difficult. The way he said passing made my stomach twist. I'd heard that same softness in his tone a dozen times before, but now I knew what hid beneath it. I met his gaze. "Is that why you're really here?" He blinked. "Excuse me? I think you already know why." For a moment he didn't speak, just stood there studying me. His jaw tightened, then something flickered in his eyes. The mask slipped. He forced a chuckle. "You've been through a lot, Mrs. Hart. Maybe you're confusing things. Trauma can. Save it," I cut in. My voice was quiet but steady. "You've been reporting on me, haven't you? Watching who I talk to when I go to the cemetery?" The silence between us turned sharp. Then, a small smile, almost pitying. "Emily, you don't understand how dangerous this is." "I understand more than you think," I said. "Daniel told me everything." His face went pale. The next seconds stretched long and heavy. The ticking clock in the hallway sounded like thunder. Finally, he stepped back, hand trembling slightly near his jacket pocket. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," he said. "You've just made things." But before he could finish, the sound of tires screeched outside. A black sedan pulled up. 2 men in suits stepped out, flashing badges I didn't recognize. "Detective Mark Paulson," one said firmly. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy." Paulson froze. "This is a mistake," he stammered. "You don't know what you're doing." But they did. One of the agents looked at me briefly, nodding. "Mrs. Hart. Thank you for your cooperation." And just like that, the man who'd stood beside me at Daniel's funeral, the one who'd hugged me when I wept, was led away in handcuffs. As the car pulled off, I stood in the doorway, my breath shaking, not out of fear, but release. That evening, the news broke. A brief report at first, local headline, small segment. But by nightfall, it spread. Detective involved in cover-up of industrial corruption case. Whistleblower confirmed alive. They didn't say Daniel's name right away, but I knew. I could feel the truth unfolding across the world like dawn breaking through fog. 2 days later, an official statement arrived from the Justice Department. It confirmed what I'd been waiting years to hear. Daniel Hart was alive, under witness protection until the trial. For the first time in nearly 3 years, I smiled without guilt. Neighbors stopped by, confused and curious. Some offered congratulations. Others avoided me, as if I'd done something wrong by believing he was gone. Grief makes people uncomfortable, resurrection even more so. But I didn't need anyone's approval. That week, I returned to the cemetery. It was strange, walking past rows of stones, knowing that one bore the name of a man still breathing. The grass around Daniel's grave had grown wild, the letters half faded by weather. I stood there quietly, the morning sun warm against my face. "I guess I don't need to bring flowers anymore," I whispered. I didn't expect him to appear, and he didn't. But somehow, that didn't matter. His voice still lingered in my mind, soft as that night's whisper. "Don't cry. Look behind you." Behind me now was life unburdened, unfinished, real. A week later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a single photo, Daniel and me, from years ago, sitting on the porch steps with coffee mugs in hand. On the back, in his handwriting, were 4 words. "Almost home. Be ready." My hands trembled as I held it, tears falling silently onto the ink. He wasn't back yet, but he would be, and this time we'd both be free. I spent the next months focusing on rebuilding. My art gallery expanded not because of the publicity, but because I poured every ounce of my healing into my work. I painted hands reaching out from darkness, faces emerging from fog, sunlight piercing through glass. People told me the paintings felt alive. I smiled when they said that. They were. By the time the trial concluded, nearly 6 months later, Daniel's testimony helped convict 4 executives and 2 officers involved in the corruption ring. His name was cleared publicly, and the case became national news. When the reporters asked how I felt, I simply said, grateful and proud, because despite everything, the lies, the grief, the silence, he had kept his promise. The day Daniel finally came home, there was no grand gesture, no camera crew, no crowd, just him walking up the front steps like he'd never left. I met him halfway, and when he smiled, tired, older, but real, it felt like the world had finally exhaled. We didn't talk much that evening. We didn't need to. We just sat together, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. There were still scars, invisible ones, but we didn't hide them. They were proof that we'd survived something that should have destroyed us. And survival, I learned, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's breathing through the ache and still choosing to hope. As the light faded, Daniel reached for my hand and whispered, "You were always the reason I came back." I leaned my head against his shoulder, the air between us finally still. And for the first time in years, I believed that peace didn't mean forgetting. It meant forgiving and beginning again. A year passed before I realized I'd stopped counting the days. When Daniel first came home, our life felt fragile, like a porcelain cup we were both afraid to touch too quickly. There were moments when I'd wake in the middle of the night, half expecting to find his side of the bed empty again. Sometimes, as he'd startle at sudden noises, his body remembering dangers that were no longer there. But time, like gentle rain, began to smooth the edges of everything. We started small, morning walks around the lake, quiet dinners with old recipes we used to love. There were awkward silences at first, yes, the kind that happen when 2 people have lived whole separate lives. But slowly, we began stitching together something new. One evening, as we sat on the porch, I asked him what kept him going all those years in hiding. He smiled faintly. "You," he said simply. "Every time it got dark, I pictured you at the kitchen table, reading with that little frown you make when you concentrate. It reminded me there was still something good left in the world." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for his hand, feeling the warmth there, proof that he was real, that we'd made it back to each other. For a long time, I thought survival meant defiance, refusing to break. But now I know it's quieter than that. Survival is choosing to love again, even after everything in you has learned how to fear. Daniel and I went back to the cemetery one final time that spring. His grave was still there, the stone tilted slightly from years of rain and frost. We stood before it, hand in hand. There was something surreal about it, 2 living people standing over a symbol of death that no longer held power. Daniel exhaled. "Feels strange," he murmured. "Like saying goodbye to a ghost," I said. He nodded. Then he pulled a folded note from his jacket pocket. "I wrote this back when they made me fake my death. I thought maybe I could leave it here now. For the man I used to be." He knelt down, pressing the letter beneath a small stone. "We didn't read it. It wasn't meant for me, it was for closure. When we walked away, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. That evening, back at home, I painted something new, a field at dawn. The sky blushing gold, two shadows walking side by side toward the light. I called it The Return. The painting sold a month later, but I almost regretted letting it go. It had felt like a part of us, a story captured in color. Still, I hoped whoever bought it would see what I saw, that sometimes the miracle isn't in being found, but in finding your way back. Life didn't become perfect after that. We still argued about little things, burnt toast, mismatched socks, who left the porch light on. But those ordinary moments were sacred to me. They were proof that love had survived the unthinkable and come home wearing a new face, one lined with humility, patience, and forgiveness. Daniel often told people he'd been away on work. It was easier that way. The full truth was too heavy to offer freely. But for those who knew, our story became something of a quiet legend in town. Sometimes, when I'd catch whispers about it at the grocery store that it's the woman whose husband came back from the dead, I'd just smile, let them think what they wanted. I didn't need to correct them, because in a way they weren't wrong. The man who came back wasn't exactly the same one I'd buried, and I wasn't the same woman who had mourned him. We'd both died in our own ways and been reborn softer, wiser, more grateful. One evening, near our second spring back together, Daniel surprised me with a drive to the edge of town. There, standing on the old overlook where his car had once gone off the cliff, he parked and turned to me. "I needed to face it," he said quietly. The wind carried the scent of rain and wildflowers. The air felt clean, new. We stood there in silence, the valley stretching wide and endless beneath us, and in that stillness I realized something profound. The very place that once marked the end of everything had become the beginning of our peace. Daniel took my hand. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes I think that voice at the grave wasn't just mine." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "Maybe it was you, telling yourself to look behind T. Oh, stop living with your eyes fixed on loss, to see that love hadn't left you. It was waiting for you to turn around." I'd never thought of it that way. But maybe he was right. Maybe healing isn't about hearing from the dead, but about listening to the living within ourselves. When we drove home that night, the headlights cast two long beams ahead of us, cutting through the dark. For the first time, the road didn't feel uncertain. It felt open. And for the first time in years, I didn't fear what waited beyond the horizon. When people hear my story, they often ask me one question: how did you forgive him? And I always pause before I answer, because forgiveness isn't something that happened all at once. It was slow, like dawn breaking inch by inch over the edge of the world. The truth is, I didn't forgive Daniel the day he returned. I forgave him the day I realized he never truly left. His love had been there all along, hidden in the quiet strength that kept me breathing, in the way I still set two plates on the table out of habit, in the stubborn faith that somewhere, somehow, he could still hear me. When you love someone deeply, their absence doesn't erase them. It just changes the shape of the space they fill. Now, when I visit the cemetery, I don't cry anymore. I bring flowers, not for mourning, but for gratitude. Because that grave isn't a symbol of death anymore. It's a reminder of how far we've come. Grief taught me that love isn't proven by holding on, it's proven by what you do when you're forced to let go. If you're listening to this, and you're standing at your own kind of grave, maybe of a marriage, a dream, or a version of yourself you've buried, I want you to remember something. Sometimes the whisper you're waiting for isn't from the past. It's from your future, calling you to look behind you and start again. Would you have done what I did? Would you have forgiven the man who let you believe he was gone if it meant he'd only ever done it to keep you safe? Tell me in the comments. And if this story found a piece of your heart tonight, stay a while. There are more stories here, waiting to remind you that even in the quietest losses, love still finds a way home.